Hi everybody, welcome. This is Bonnie Langenfeld. I am live today and I'm glad you're here. Whether it's good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, I'm glad you're here too. By the way, leave a comment for me below. I'd love to know where you are, from where you are watching me. Today I have two things. I have a huge mistake I made years ago and how I've learned to correct that. Much trial and error, but I'll save you the pain of all that. And then the other thing that I'm going to start with is actually my favorite fabric of the day. And I can't go very far without using Stonehenge, so I want to show you that first of all. This is, I hope you can see well enough, this is Stonehenge fabrics. They come in various colorways. Mostly, I'm pretty sure, you're going to find them in every good fabric shop, perhaps even in a craft store, because they're very, very popular. I love them because they have so much value change in them, so much texture. They have a lot of colors, obviously. Here are some greens and these lovely golds and browns. They have many more than I'm showing you, but I think these are just fabulous. And I'm using some of my pieces that I've already cut up, but I can't bear to cut them unless I use them because they're so precious. And then a gray black, which is just lovely. Now, I also have a couple of heartbreaker fabrics that are Stonehenge. And the first one is this one, and I love it. Look at all the texture and the tonal variations. It's just fabulous. But the color is really too vibrant for a lot of what I do. Now you can see I have cut into this. This is how I keep my fabric, by the way, just kind of in chunks. It's hard to use because of the vibrant greens. And then the other heartbreaker I have is this one, which I've seen a lot with these little gold flecks on it in different colorways too. And the thing that kind of tricked me is that in the store sometimes if the lighting isn't just right, you don't see the gold flecks, you just see all this great Stonehenge type texture. And so I buy this stuff, and then there are not too many ways I use it, but it is a beautiful fabric. And if you've got some ideas for how to use this or where you have used this, I'd love to know, because I'd like to make better use of such a gorgeous, gorgeous piece. If Stonehenge Northcott people are listening, I would recommend that you put out more nature colored fabrics, more true browns and greens rather than the more vibrant ones. But hey, that's just me, and I don't buy a million yards of fabric every year. Now to my huge mistake. I remember years and years ago I was taking a class, and the teacher frankly didn't do too much. She was telling me, or telling us, what she had done, and then we should do the same, but she didn't really explain how. So I was trying to make this large, like 24 by 24 landscape picture, and I was trying to, I didn't know much about anything, so I just put down a piece of very thin stabilizer. I don't even know what it was. It was maybe something like you use in clothing when you're, I don't know. Anyway, it was very, very thin, way too thin. And I ended up putting all my pieces on that. I didn't even know I could glue at that point, or fuse. I mean, this is ancient history. So I pinned down all my pieces onto this thin stabilizer, and zigzagged around the edge with variegated threads, which I don't really use anymore either. Anyway, when I got done, the image itself wasn't awful, well, maybe, but it was terribly wrinkled and contorted and out of shape and puckered and gathered. And so I tried to steam it and press it and pull it, and there just wasn't enough steaming, pressing, and pulling in the world to get that thing to lie flat. So as a special little treat for you, I have that picture on my website, and it's on landscapesandfabric.com under the instruction tab, and you'll find that the instruction tab pulls down, and then you'll see flubs, and I have a bunch of my mistakes on there, and this one that I'm talking about with the big tree is the first one. So go look at it, and maybe at first glance it doesn't look too bad, but I hate to say it, but look closely, because it's not good. It's not good at all. So that leads me to what I'm talking about today for you. I know I talk a lot about stabilizers, but this problem that I encountered and tried to wrestle with took me a long time to overcome. There was no one around that was telling me about all these great stabilizers. In fact, I don't think we had great stabilizers. Maybe we did, but anyway, some lady finally told me, oh, what you need is something like they use in millinery, where they stabilize the brim of a hat or something like that. So I found Pellon, heavy duty Pellon, and that sort of changed my life. So today I use Pellon. It's usually number 70 because it's very stiff, stable. It's a total polyester non-woven, and it can be washed, although I almost never wash my pictures. But that's really good. And they have a Pellon 71, which has a fusible on one side, and a 72, which has a fusible on both sides. And I typically don't use the fusibles, except in special circumstances. The other one that I like to use for a heavy stabilizer on my pictures is Timtex. And Timtex is a little bit heavier than Pellon 70, and it's a little more expensive. But it's a polyester, and it does a beautiful job of not letting things gather up or pucker up. If they do, if you're stitching really, really heavily, you can steam press it, and 99.9% of the time you can get that little puckered area out. So what I have been doing is making pictures. You know, I usually frame them rather than quilt them, and if I'm going to quilt, I want a little bit lighter stabilizer, but still something that's substantial enough to not have my thread sketching pucker up. So let me show you this picture. This is, I should put it up here if I can. Would that work? Well, I'll show it to you a little closer. This picture is made on Pellon, so it's fairly heavy duty. But the piece itself was pretty complicated. Now, it's not huge, but when I was making the house, there were a lot of little pieces to it, a lot of, you know, like the reflection in the windows was underneath the stitching for the sashing, and then the siding lines were stitched on top of the siding, and then the shutters came on top of that, and on and on and on. And so I was a little nervous that I might just screw it up, frankly. And plus, I didn't want this bigger piece under the tiny little bed of my little Elna sewing machine. So I made the house itself off the picture. And here's what I'm talking about. I made, of course I have a thread right in the middle of this, but you've never seen an extra thread around before, have you? So this is the background that I made, and I put the fabric down for the background trees. It already has some texture in it, but I did some extra zigzag stitching and highlighting, and then I put in the pine tree on the side, stitched right onto this background, and as well this tree over here on this side, and did all the highlighting and stuff. Because this stuff, although there's a lot of stitching there, I'll show you the back side, it's not as intense and as layered and has to be as exact as that house. So you can maybe make out the outline of where the house is to go. I did that so that when I was stitching, I could stitch behind it a little bit where the house would overlap it, because it's really tricky to sew have the house there already and then sew the leaves right up to that line. I've tried that before, and let me tell you, I have had to pull out a few threads, even though that's my motto, never rip out anything. So I put the house on a separate piece of thinner stabilizer, made the house, and then tacked it with a little bit of glue to keep it in place, and then I stitched down all the edges. Now, what do I use for that sort of thing? Well, one of the things I've started using more recently is Decor Bond. It has a fusible side and a non-fusible side, and I almost never fuse it, but it's there if you want it. This stuff is pretty thin, but you can, if you start stitching with one layer in your as you're backing, you can always just add another layer onto it. And this is what I believe it was Susan Brubaker Knapp taught me to use. She's wonderful. And she said she does just stick another piece of this Decor Bond behind what she's sewing on if she feels like it's starting to gather up. And she, of course, quilts her pieces too. So this is nice because it's thin enough to get some texture from the quilting that she does at the end. I usually don't quilt, but it's nice to know that's a possibility if you do, or if I ever do. Another thing I like to sew on, and I've gone through these before on various posts and things, but I want you to really understand that this is a goodie. This is crinoline, and as I always say, if you're old enough, you probably remember the scratchy underskirts from our big flared dresses in the 50s. We used this as a way to keep the skirt all puffed out around the sides and very full and lush looking. So I just usually take one layer of this and put my background fabrics on it, do my stitching, and then I do I trim it to size, and often this is what I put on my greeting cards because they are I want them to stay real thin and flat. Another similar product is buckram. It's just a tiny bit heavier. It's a woven fabric as well. And this too, both of these are available at Joann's, I know, in their utility fabrics area. And I use this the same way. Crinoline or buckram are both good things to keep in mind. Here is an example of a piece of Timtex, and you can see it's very, very stable. It's very stiff. Now, if you're watching live or in the recordings and you have some questions for me, do put them in the comments, because I do go back and look at the comments and reply to them. And finally, I want to invite you to join me on my next Facebook Live, which will be the next second Monday of the month at 12 o'clock Eastern Time. And I would love to have some ideas from you about what you would like me to cover. I certainly don't plan these a month in advance yet. I might get to that point someday. But I'd love to talk about what you are interested in, what you'd like to know. Additionally, you know, I have Bonnie's Facebook page, which is Bonnie's Fabric Art, Bonnie Langenfeld's Fabric Art, and Bonnie and Fabric Friends for all of you who have been members of my classes. We are trying to put a group and get a group going where we can share information just to those of us who have the background that I explain and teach in my classes. So check those out, as well as my website, and don't forget to look at the flubs. There's more than just one mistake there for you to enjoy. And I thank you for coming today. I hope you had a good time, and I hope you learned something, and we'll stay in touch. Bye. Bye. Bye.